Okay, and it's live now. As you know, about 30 to 60 second delay before people on Facebook see it. So,
Perfect. Yep, we'll give them a sec.
okay. Okay, they're coming on.
Cool. Good morning to those of you that are entering right now. We're giving everybody just a couple more seconds to log in and join us if they choose to this morning. But of course, in the meantime, if you have any questions about meditation, go ahead and add those into the chat, and I'll be happy to talk about them. We've been talking a lot about yoga and the monkey mind and how we use meditation to start to bring our thoughts and our attention together, or I should say our action and our attention together. And just some different modalities through which we can do that based in yoga philosophy. So we've talked about the 8 limbs, you know, the yamas, the niyamas, and everything all the way on up to samadhi. And today we're going to talk a little more about some of the yoga philosophy that underlies how we can really get into one of the root goals of yoga, which ultimately is to transcend our suffering. You know, life is full of all sorts of stuff, right? And so the idea of these meditation practices is to start to be able to approach some of these things with a new mindset, right? So today we're going to talk about the 5 main roots of our suffering according to the yoga tradition. And they're really cool. And I say that not because they're the roots of our suffering and they cause us suffering, but because of the constructs around them. So the idea here is not that these things are necessarily good or bad and that we need to not have these things in our life. It's about recognizing when they show up and how they're impacting your experience. And the way that we're able to start doing that is developing our witness consciousness, which is what we're doing through our meditation practice. So today we're actually going to revisit a meditation that we did earlier in the series with a little tweak to it. But the reason why is because it's so important, this idea of developing that state of awareness where you can just witness what's there without getting caught up in a story about it. And especially as humans, we really love our stories, right? We like to watch TV, we like to read books, we maybe write our own stories, or, you know, as kids, we have our imagination. Maybe we still do that as adults, right? Hopefully you still do it as an adult. You know, you create this story in your head and then turn it into a game or whatever it is. All right, so we love our stories. But the idea here, when we start talking about these roots of our suffering, right, is that we're recognizing when those stories are showing up and maybe creating a negative dialogue in the inner realm, right? Because that's going to impact our experience. And if we can just notice that's an experience without trying to create even more of a story around it, that's when we can start to uproot some of these causes of our suffering and start to just experience life in a different way. So the first cause of our suffering is actually the one, it's like an umbrella, or really it's like a tree. A lot of times you'll actually see the image of a tree accompanying this concept. And this concept, the core of the tree, the trunk of the tree, is avidya, right? And avidya is misunderstanding, right? Or incorrect perception. So we see something, we experience something, and then we take it and make it more than it really is by creating a story around it, right? So maybe you texted a friend and for whatever reason, that friend didn't text you back. So instead of just being like, oh, they didn't text me back, which is what's happening, right? Then you start telling yourself this story about how, oh, maybe I'm bothering them, maybe they don't like me, maybe I'm annoying them, you know, whatever it is that might come up, whatever dialogue might come up, maybe they've got a track record of this. So you're like, well, they're not a good friend because they don't respond to my text messages immediately, or whatever it is, right? So we're taking a single incident of this person has not responded back to my text message in 30 seconds, and then we make a story about it, or an hour, whatever it is, right? And this could be applied across the board for tons of situations, right? Something happens and we make it mean more by applying a story to it. And I think that concept really explains avidya, or this idea of misunderstanding. But it can be more than that too. Like with all of this yoga philosophy stuff, we can dig deep, right? And we've only got a short amount of time to dig. So I'm just giving some overviews again, but misunderstanding about facts, right? Or what we think are facts that maybe we need more information about, right? So I think we talked about that a little bit last week. There's so much information all over right now, and it's really easy for us to already have a belief, and we identify with that belief, and then we look for information that supports it and ignore the information that doesn't, rather than bringing all of the information into the awareness and trying to witness that information, again, without stories, without preferences, without judgment, and just really try and see what's there in an unbiased way. And then maybe make an opinion or a judgment about that. Maybe, or maybe not, right? Maybe you can just be aware of information without making it mean something more, right? Like I identify with that. Which actually brings us to the next one, which is asmita, or the things that we identify with, right? Because the things that we identify with, they're useful. And I feel like this is important to note. I'm not saying that the misunderstandings or the things that we identify with, or as we're going to talk about in a minute, the things that we avoid or are attached to, I'm not saying that we shouldn't do those things or that these things don't have a use, but they can cause some suffering. And so we need to be aware of that as it comes up, especially when we find ourselves in a state where we're upset or angry or whatever kind of emotion you're experiencing that's causing you to suffer, right? To just look at that and be like, okay, which one of these 5 is going on here right now? And sometimes just that practice can help to give you a little bit of space between what you're feeling and whatever story you've created around it. So going back to asmita, or ego, really is what it boils down to. I get a little hesitant when I use the word ego because a lot of times people already have their thoughts and opinions about it, right? Egotistical, like that egotistical guy that just thinks he's all that or whatever it is, right? But really, it's just the things that we identify with. It really boils down to our personality. And I think the word personality is really cool because when you actually break it down into its Greek root, which is persona, it translates over as mask. So our personality is really just the different masks that we put on. But the thing here is that the longer we wear a mask, the more we start to identify with it and believe that that is who we are. So yoga is kind of about starting to like notice what masks we wear all the time and recognize that there's something else underneath that, right? And to kind of contemplate, like, who am I when I'm not a mother, a student, an employee, a brother, whatever it is, right? Whatever masks you put on. Who am I when I take all of those off, right? And that's really, I think, the key element here with asmita is just being willing to start to strip those masks away and get curious about what's underneath. And also notice when you're wearing a mask and it's causing you unnecessary pain, right? So again, avidya is our misunderstanding, which is the big trunk of this tree. And then the roots kind of stem off from this, right? So pretty much everything can be traced back to this concept of misunderstanding, right? We're wearing our mask and we're misunderstanding that that's not the only thing that we are, is that mask that we're wearing right now. There's more to us than just that one mask that we put on, or even the multiple masks that we put on. Okay. So the next one is called raga, which is our attachment, right? The things that we take in that's mine, right? Which is another concept of ego, actually. Ego says, this is mine, this is mine, this is mine, I like this is mine, right? And so we collect and gather all of these things. And then when we lose those things, now we're not very happy, right? Maybe you had, I don't know, a favorite t-shirt and you love that t-shirt. You've had it since you were in high school. Like, it's just like your favorite shirt ever. You got it at a concert that you went to with some of your best friends, and you're super attached to this t-shirt, right? And then all of a sudden something happens to the t-shirt. You're cleaning and it gets a big rip in it, and it rips right through the band logo, right? And now you're suffering because you've been very attached to that t-shirt, and now it is a cleaning rag. And that sucks, right? That's sad. But it's important to just know that that's just, it's a thing, right? We're attached, and the more attached we are to something, the more upset we're going to be when we lose it. And it doesn't mean that you can't have your things that you love and you want to keep safe and treasure. Like, I'm not saying that. I'm just saying to have some awareness around it. If it's causing you anxiety, if it's causing you distress, if attaining something that you don't have is causing you pain and suffering, to just be aware, right? It doesn't mean you have to stop. You might decide that you want to stop after you recognize what's going on. You might be like, oh, I guess this really isn't worth how I feel right now, right? Or maybe it is, and so you keep doing it, and that's fine too, right? Again, the idea here is to just be aware of what's causing our suffering, and then try not to make it mean more than that, right? So again, raga is our attachment. So then devesha, which is the next one of these roots of our sufferings, is this idea of aversion, right? The things that we don't like, we avoid these things. So you don't like confrontation, right? And so you avoid confrontation, even though sometimes confrontation can be useful, right? If there's something that really needs to be addressed and discussed, avoiding it can actually cause more problems than the initial conversation that maybe needs to happen, right? And again, this can go to objects too. A lot of times it does. Like, ooh, I don't like that because it makes me feel a certain way. You know, maybe you've had a negative experience with something, or like a food, right? You ate something once, it didn't sit well, and now you don't want it anymore. So sometimes these aversions or these things that we're attached to can be helpful, right? But again, if it's causing you suffering, just check in and have some awareness around that, right? And notice if there's anything that you are doing to contribute to that suffering even further. So devesha can be considered aversion, it can be denial, it can be resistance, it can be avoidance, like all of those kinds of words that are like rejecting words that would fall under the category of devesha. And then the last one is abhinivesha, which is translated over a lot of times as fear of death. But really, it can just be broken down to fear itself. And it's not always fear of death, like in the literal sense, like if I do this thing, I'm going to die. It can be fear of the death of something, right? The death of a certain mask that you wear, the death of a certain way of being, or a certain relationship in your life, or a certain, like even just moving, like in a way that's kind of like a death and a rebirth, because you're leaving behind this old life and then you're coming into this new one. And sometimes, a lot of times, we make our decisions based on that fear, because whatever it is, we're attached to it, right? We like this way of being, right? And so we fear making a choice that might alter this way of being, right? Without understanding that maybe what's over here is actually going to be better in the long run, right? It's like this idea of, I don't know, what we have. We like to be where we are a lot of times. It's really easy to settle in and get comfortable. We talked about this a couple weeks ago with the idea of tapas, right? Embracing that, which helps to facilitate our self-growth. And it's really easy to just be like, you know what? I'm comfy. I don't want to do the hard thing. But a lot of times once you do the hard thing, you're happier on the other side, right? And so this idea of abhinivesha, or this fear, a lot of times it drives us to make our decisions. And for me personally, one of the things that I really love to do is when I'm making a choice, I'll ask myself, like I'll center in and just be like, okay, am I making this decision out of fear or out of maybe love or something else, right? I tend to find in my own personal practice, at least, and we're all different, so you might notice different things as you progress in this work if you choose to do so. But I tend to find that I'm usually either making choices out of love or compassion, or I'm making choices out of fear. I'm choosing to do something because I love it, I'm inspired about it, whatever it is, like I chose to do this class not out of any kind of fear, but just because I love teaching yoga. I love the philosophy of it. I love meditation. I think it's really useful, and I love helping other people, right? So this was a choice to do this that I made out of love and compassion and these kinds of emotions, right? But maybe you make a choice to stay inside your house, right? I'm not saying you shouldn't be social distancing right now, so that's not where I'm going with this. But maybe instead of going outside and playing in your yard, right? Even though you're still totally social distance, you're just like, but what if my neighbor 40 houses down coughs and it carries over on the wind and I get sick, right? I'm using a really extreme example right now, but just go with it. So we make this choice out of fear. I'm not even going to go outside and get any fresh air at all, which actually fresh air is really important. During the Spanish flu in 1918, I think it was, one of the things that they think actually exacerbated the issue was that people weren't getting enough fresh air. They were cooping themselves up and breathing in recycled air, and then as family members started to get sick, they're still breathing in that recycled air that we're all sharing. And it actually led to some more problems. Like sunlight and fresh air, man, they're really important, right? So making a choice to do something, even though it's a little scary, right? Maybe the neighbor's outside, so you want to wait until later or whatever it is, right? But recognizing why you're choosing what you're choosing, right? Recognizing why you're doing what you're doing. And then just asking yourself, like, okay, now that I know why I'm doing what I'm doing, is that still what I want to do, right? Is that still the decision I want to make? And if the answer is yes, great, do it. Like this isn't about trying to not have masks or not be attached to things or not have aversion to things. It's just about recognizing when they're there and when they're contributing to our suffering. So maybe we can make a different choice if we want, right? And that's it. And meditation helps us to develop that witnessing consciousness, because it's really hard when you're wrapped up in an emotional response to recognize that these things are happening. And most of the time, that's when these things are happening and actually causing our suffering, is when we're having some kind of big emotional response around them. So if we can recognize, like, okay, I'm having an emotional response, step back. What is triggering this emotional response? And most of the times, really, I think all the time, one of these 5 things will be evident. It might not be completely clear, like right away, but the more we practice meditation, typically the faster we can identify. And if you're not sure, then probably it's avidya. Because again, avidya is just incorrect understanding, misunderstanding, misinterpretation, right? And a lot of times those misinterpretations cause us a lot of pain because, again, we have these stories and we get wrapped up in them. And it's really easy to do, especially when we're emotional, right? So meditation helps us to start to clear the mind, right? And make way for what we call the witnessing consciousness, which is just the ability to step back and look at the big picture and say, okay, what's going on here? Without preference, without judgment, without creating more story around it, without getting caught up into the emotions around it. Like, you can still have the emotions, right? But when you're in the state of witnessing consciousness, you're not identified with that emotion. You're not one with that anymore. You can step back. You can see, wow, I'm really angry right now. Why is that? As opposed to just being in your anger and acting from that place. So if you have any questions about any of that, of course, feel free to enter it into the chat. Again, we're doing Cliff Notes versions of some pretty big philosophical concepts, but they're important because these are the philosophical concepts that really drove the creation of these practices. People recognized, like, hey, we're suffering. Hey, we're doing things that are, maybe not useful to our self-growth. So by identifying these things, we can start to take a step back from them and sit in a place of maybe some higher awareness. And meditation really is about doing that. It's about clearing the mind, right? Stilling that monkey brain, right? Retraining neural pathways. That's a big one. And they might not have had back 5,000 years ago terminology of neural pathways, right? And gray matter and white matter and all of these different things, right? They didn't have language for that. They didn't have technology to discover these things. But still, somewhere inside of them, they knew that, hey, we have tendencies, right? And it's really easy for us to get into these tendencies. They actually call them samskaras. It's a samskara vasana cycle. It's really cool. I'm not going to get into all that right now, but basically it's neural pathways. And they figured out that the more we program our brain a certain way, the more likely we are to default into that pattern. So as we sit and meditate, as we start to unplug from the external world, as we start to unplug from our thoughts, we start to get a little bit of space from whatever habitual actions or reactions that we typically fall into, right? And then through that space, we can figure out, like, is this useful or is this not, right? And sometimes even if it's not useful, we still choose to do it, right? And it's not a bad thing, because it's a practice, right? It just because you know doesn't mean that automatically you're going to be able to change it overnight, right? I think it was last week, I drew a picture of a brain and like a really, really thick line through it. Like, if you have a neural pathway that's super deeply ingrained, awareness and making the attempt to try and shift to create a new neural pathway is just the first step in starting to reprogram some of that. So again, meditation kind of helps us to get that step back and to do it more often, to make the choice to reroute a little more, if that's the choice that you want to make. So again, the key here with meditation is that we're developing witness consciousness, and that creates our ability to see from a broader perspective, from a few more steps back, right? And the more practiced we get in meditation, the more steps back we're able to take, right? And the more of the big picture we're able to see. So we're starting to clear that avidya or that misunderstanding away just by gaining a little bit more perspective, right? So again, today we're going to do a practice that's focused on creating this witnessing consciousness, right? That's focused on unplugging from the external world, unplugging from our thoughts, and just getting into that center that just watches, right? Without preference, without judgment. Those things are huge. Like, if you can just master watching or experiencing without preference and judgment, like, the rest of this just kind of, you don't even have to worry about it anymore, right? These things happen because we've got these neural pathways, and some of them are based in survival, right? Like our aversion, right? We avoid things because survival, right? You don't want to drink cleaning products, right? Like, that's not good for us. So we have aversion to that, right? You smell it and you're like, ooh, get that away from me. I don't want that anywhere near my face, right? Because it's not good for you. It's going to do bad things to your insides. So aversion is good, right? So that would be a situation where you're like, ooh, like there was some pain and some suffering because you smelled the bleach and like it kind of, it was too close to your face and you're like, ooh, get that away from me. Open up the windows, give me some fresh air, right? So these things aren't something that we should get rid of. They're just something that we should be aware of. And I know I've said that a lot throughout this conversation, but a lot of times as we start to talk about these things, that's one of the things that'll come up when I'm in group settings. And since we're not in a group setting, I don't know what's coming up for you. So I just want to make it really, really, really clear that these things are just things to be aware of, not things that we're trying to totally get rid of completely, right? Because they can be useful, right? So if you do have any questions about anything, I know I just kind of dumped a lot of information, go ahead and enter those in the chat. We have this week and next week for our 60-minute sessions. And then I think after that, we're going to shift over to 20-minute meditation only sessions at 9:30. So keep an eye out for an official announcement about that. But that being said, if you do have any other questions or anything that you really want to like learn about or hash out here in the next 10 minutes, or actually it's already 9:25. Oh my goodness, time flies, right? So I'll start next week's class with, again, an opportunity for some Q&A. So that'll be the final Q&A that we have for our meditation practices. So feel free to come in with anything that's been coming up. It doesn't have to be even related to what we've been talking about. And I'll do my best to answer it or to redirect you somewhere that might be able to answer whatever it is that's coming up for you. And other than that, next week we'll plan on doing a practice called Yoga Nidra, which I'll talk about more when we actually start class next week. But it's lovely. I've told you guys 61 points of light is like my favorite practice, but actually this one might be my even more favorite practice. It's really cool. It goes through the different layers of body and mind, and it's like this systematic unplugging. And it's really, really nice. And the thing that is really cool about it is when Swami Rama, who came over from the Himalayas in 1970 something, he went into a university. I can't remember which right now, but he was like, hey guys, you want to see something cool? Hook me up to your machines. And so they hooked him up to whatever, I think whatever it is that can track your sleep cycle and what's happening there. They hooked him up to that kind of stuff. And what they found when he did this practice was that 1 hour of Yoga Nidra was the equivalent for him to 4 hours of REM sleep. So that's huge. Like a lot of us don't even get 4 hours of REM sleep in a night. So we're going to do that next week. So next week we won't have a seated practice. You could do it seated, but it would probably be more useful to do it lying down. So just keep that in mind for next week. Next week's practice will be a longer practice, and it's going to be pretty much just like laying down, chilling out, and doing a really nice guided relaxation meditation. It's more than that. It's Yoga Nidra. Nidra actually translates over as sleep. So it's yogic sleep or yogic awareness of sleep, or there's been a bunch of ways that I've heard it translated. But I think the best, clearest one is the literal translation, which is yogic sleep. Nidra means sleep. So we will do that next week. Otherwise, let's just come up to a seat. All right, do a couple movements. Maybe we roll the shoulders around or roll them back and forth, or turn the head. And you might like to press one palm away from you for a moment. Keep the shoulders soft. And then we'll make a hook with the elbow. Relax the fingertips. Bring the arm across that hook and really relax the shoulders. Take a deep breath into the open space between the shoulder blades. Maybe turn the chin. And we'll do the same thing on the other side. Press the palm away. Give it a little stretch. Then you can release the fingertips. Make your hook. Work it across. Again, shoulders stay relaxed here. It's really easy to want to like hunch it up. So try and give yourself some space. And then maybe turn the chin. Breathe into that open space between the shoulder blades. And then we'll release. And then from here, go ahead and come onto your back. Or if you're sitting in a seat, of course, you can just stay seated. I know sometimes it's hard to get up and down off of the floor. There's environmental things going on. But when you come onto your back, you might like to hug your knees in towards your chest. And if you're choosing to do the whole practice seated, then maybe you just fold forward over the lap. If you're laying on your back, you could rock side to side a little bit, keep squeezing those knees in. If you're folding forward over the lap, you might just sway the spine a couple of times. And then when you're ready, just settle in, get still. Maybe close the eyes. Start to get comfortable in your body. If you're lying on the floor, you might like to take feet about hip distance apart. Let the pinky toe edges fall out towards the ground or the edges of your yoga mat. You relax the backs of the hands out at your sides with palms facing up. And this just brings us closer to anatomical alignment. Start to become aware of the points of contact the body makes with the floor or the chair beneath you. And for the next few breaths, just relax into those contact points. Let the body start to become soft, effortless, still. Imagine that you could just breathe into that comfortable, steady space. Start to become aware of sound. And let sounds just pass through the awareness. Don't try to identify what they are or where they're coming from. Just notice. Imagine that you could dissolve the thoughts of the mind into the sounds that pass through it. Imagine that you could rest the mind in the moment between sounds. Maybe you can start to draw the mind inward, become aware of sounds within the body, maybe the breath, the heart. Dissolving the mind into sounds as they enter the awareness. Start to bring the skin, the surface of the skin, into the awareness. Feeling the largest organ of the body. Imagine that you could simply witness sensation on the skin as it arises. Witness the points of contact it makes with the ground or the chair. The way the clothing feels different between inhale and exhale. Just witnessing and dissolving the awareness into sensations of the skin. Start to notice thoughts as they arise. Again, try not to let yourself get caught up into a story or a stream of thought. Just notice as the thoughts arise in the mind, and then allow them to just simply fall away. Imagine that you could rest or dissolve the awareness into the moment between thoughts. Simply becoming aware of that clear, quiet space. Noticing as the thoughts enter it. Now see if you can start to become aware of the part of yourself that was listening to sound, feeling the skin, watching the thoughts. And now see if you can observe the observer. Can you take one step back and witness the part of yourself that watches? The part of you beneath the mask. Can you be with that part of yourself? As you feel ready, you can start to take some deeper, fuller breaths. Bring the awareness back to the body. Breathe outward into the limbs. Start to wiggle them awake. As you feel ready, if you're lying on the floor, you could roll to one side for a moment. See if you can maintain this internal state of awareness as you shift to a seat. And if you're seated and you'd like to make an adjustment, maybe switch the cross of the legs. And do that now again, just staying mindful that we're staying anchored into this quiet inner space. Maybe you can even stay connected to that witness consciousness, that state of observation. And as you settle into the seat, again, observe what's there. Notice the body. If there's any way you could be just 5 to 10% more comfortable, make those adjustments. Settle into a seat where you can be comfortable and still. Start to become aware of the breath in the nostrils. Notice the sensation of it flowing in and out. Feel cool air rising up on the inhale to the point between the eyes. Feel the warm air flowing down and out again through the nose. Dissolve the thoughts of the mind into the sensation of the breath in the nose. And as you continue to breathe to and from the eyebrow center, you might like to pause the breath after the inhale. Gently retaining the breath at the point between the eyes. Just for a moment, maybe 1 to 3 seconds. It's important that if you're adding this pause, it feels comfortable, easy, effortless. And each inhale, Or each pause after inhale brings the mind into stillness a little more. As if it could clear that inner space. Hold the awareness at the point between the eyes. You might start to notice sensation gathering there. Building a little more with each breath. You might even be able to imagine that you could see that sensation as a soft white light. With each inhale, that light pulses a little brighter. On the exhale, it dims slightly back towards its point of origin there at the eyebrow center. And on the next inhale, it comes back even brighter. Reaches outward a little further from that point, a little deeper into the mind. As that light or the sensation of it spreads back through the brain, it continues to clear away everything. It's as if you're breathing the mind into a calm, clear space. Until eventually the light reaches so far into the mind that it's as if the entire brain is soaking in that light or the sensation of it. When that happens, the light stops pulsing. The brain simply basks in that light, soaking in it. Clearing and balancing the mind. As we complete our practice, I might like to bring palms together at the center of the heart. Maybe take a deep breath into that space. Maybe set the intention today to approach your experience, both external and internal, as a witness. To experience yourself and the world, maybe just a step further back. To notice without preference or judgment. To meet yourself and others with compassionate awareness. I hope to see you next week. See you, right, for our final 60-minute session. And again, we will do Yoga Nidra. It's a wonderful practice. We'll spend maybe 10 or 15 minutes discussing it, and then we'll be down on our mats or laying, or you could do it seated again, for about 40 minutes. So plan on being comfortable. Make sure you dress warm. As we do these practices, our body temperature actually starts to drop as we shift into the parasympathetic response of the nervous system. So just be mindful of that as you prepare for next week's practice, and make sure that you're going to be warm enough. Maybe wear long sleeves, socks, you could bring a blanket, whatever you need to be comfortable for a 40-minute practice where there's no position changes. So other than that, I hope that you all have a great day. Namaste.